to leading interviews, the conversations with women working in business, politics and the arts. I'm Carol Schwartz, the chair of the Women's Leadership Institute Australia, and today I'm speaking with the brilliant Tan Le. Tan Le is founder and CEO of EMOTIV, a neuro-informatics company advancing understanding of the human brain. She is a technology innovator, entrepreneur, business executive, and sought-after speaker. She's also a very accomplished public company director. Tan is the recipient of numerous awards, including the prestigious 2018 Innovation Research Interchange Achievement Award as a pioneering leader in the development of mobile EEG systems and in advancing understanding of the human brain. She was named a National Geographic Emerging Explorer in 2013. She was also named Fast Company's most influential woman in technology in 2010 and Forbes 50 Names You Need to Know in 2011. She has been an ambassador for the status of women since 2001 and named Young Australian of the Year in 1998, which was where I first met Tan. She's just gone on to achieve so many other acclaimed awards and recognitions. Tan, hello, welcome. So lovely to see you and speak to you. How are you?
I've been great, Carol, and it's so nice to see you too. I know you since I was a 20-year-old young lady.
Yes.
It's been such a wonderful experience to kind of grow up and mature, I guess, in some ways over the course of the last 20 plus years.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I was thinking back and remembering that lunch that we were at when you were the Young Australian of the Year and just being blown away by, you know, your intelligence, your thoughtfulness, how articulate you were. Tell me how you felt about being named Young Australian of the Year and, you know, particularly with your family history. Tell us a little bit about your family history.
Sure. Well, the first thing I'll say is that the Young Australian of the Year award, which I received as a 20-year-old, was a very humbling experience. It was a time where, if you remember Australia's political history, we were seeing the rise of the One Nation Party and a lot of division in Australia around, you know, what does it mean to be Australian? And my family had come to Australia back in 1981. I was 4 years old and we had adopted Australia as our new home. And growing up in Australia as a member of the migrant community, it's normal and natural for any teenager to start wondering about their own sense of identity and belonging. I actually remember very distinctly those years of my life where I wasn't really sure why people were calling me out and saying that I should go home to where I belong. And so it was a very tough time in some respects around personal identity and belonging. And so when I was recognised, and I was a complete unknown working class kid from Footscray compared to all of the other very famous young Australians who had been named Young Australian of the Year in prior years. And so I didn't, in many ways, Carol, I felt like an imposter. I felt like I was a symbol, but not really deserving of what I had received as the honour that was bestowed on me, not so much because of who I was, but more because of what I represented at that moment in Australia's history. And in many ways, I felt like I had a lot to prove in terms of my own life's journey and the arc of how that journey would evolve over the decades to come, because in many respects I didn't feel like I had done all that much, even though people felt some people probably thought I was deserving at that time. For me, I felt that I didn't really belong and I was struggling a lot. And I even remember when I went to speak at so many venues, I was terrified. I was so afraid because growing up at home in my family, whilst my mum encouraged me to speak out, I was still a child. at home, and in that context with my grandmother and my aunties and uncles, I didn't really have a strong position of authority, and so it was definitely a tough and challenging time, but also very formative for me. I consider the award as one of the pivotal moments in my life that really altered the trajectory of what I perceived I could become for myself, because up until that point, as a 20-year-old, my own perception of what I could become and what I wanted to do with my life was still very narrow. And it was framed based on my mum's own understanding of what I should be and her encouragement, but it wasn't really based on the environment that we were in and the world that was changing so rapidly around us. And I think I really am grateful for the award, because it really changed me in really fundamental ways.
Yeah, and I remember, you were were you finishing off your law degree, or were you doing your articles at that time?
I was just finishing off law and starting articles at Freehills.
Yes, that's right. Because I remember we used to get together for conversations when you were making the decision as to whether or not pursuing a life in the law was the sort of thing that you wanted to do, and particularly because you had already been introduced to technology through colleagues and friends of yours. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think people struggle a lot with, the paths that they choose. So it would be good to hear your experience.
Yeah, my experience was really interesting, because I had convinced my mum that I shouldn't do medicine after high school. And I chose law because I was very actively involved in the Vietnamese community, and I felt that law was the framework that shaped our interaction as citizens in a society. And I wanted to be a part of shaping that and understanding that, so that I could be able to shape and help my own community. But once I started law, I realized very quickly, I started to read books about technology. And of course, I love reading, being a bookworm and a nerd, a total nerd. I really, really love just learning about new things. And I realized very quickly as a young lawyer that I had somehow missed the memo in this whole push to finish school and get into, choose the right course and just study. I missed this massive shift that was shaping the whole world and this era of my life, of this whole era that's going to affect everybody. It really, technology is the one driving force that is shaping the future. And I actually it became very obvious to me that the people who created the future will ultimately be the people that will own the future. And I needed to not just sit on the sidelines and facilitate the process of creation. I wanted to be a part of creating that future myself. I wanted to be in the thick of innovating and creating new things. And I remember reaching out to you and having coffees with you where I said, I'm thinking about this, and I remember how you always ask really good questions because you challenged me about, so how are you going to make this transition and what would it take? And it was really a fantastic opportunity for me to be mentored by someone who kept me grounded, but at the same time encouraged me to keep pursuing things that I was passionate about. And I remember I used to go to work at 6:50 in the morning, catching the train out of Footscray. And I remember distinctly looking around at the people on the train on Monday morning. And in fact, most days of the week, they looked very miserable. And the image that I had in my mind was of sheep just pushing through life every day. We're in this momentum and we just keep going through it. And we're just doing the motions, but not really stopping to reflect and think about where it's taking us. And even though I was on I had an amazing experience and a lot of amazing mentors at Freehills, I still felt that I would be doing myself a disservice if I didn't leave and pursue something that was calling at me and tugging at my passion. It really fired my heart and captivated my imagination to think about the future that technology could drive and change, and how it could change the world and shape the world. And so I got out, and I have to say it was really hard, Carol. It was really tough because you don't have any life savings. I was very young. I wasn't a technologist. I wasn't an engineer. Didn't have a background in technology by any stretch of the imagination. So it was certainly a very difficult transition, but one I'm really grateful I made because it was definitely the right path for me. But it did take some time for me to kind of reorient myself and to really embrace the world of technology.
Yeah. So you're talking about the early 2000s, yeah?
Yes.
That's right. And so there had been the tech crash, if you like, of around 2000, where, everybody had been so excited about what the opportunities were, and then all of a sudden it all blew up.
It all blew up and crashed and burned. And in fact, I left Freehills right after the crash. I was very attracted to the story of these entrepreneurs and what they were doing, but I also was very grounded by the fact that they needed really sustainable business models, and there could be a bubble that was forming around this. So I didn't leave before the burst, and I think that was a very good experience for me because I left afterwards, because that was a very sobering experience for a lot of entrepreneurs, for a lot of companies that had rode that wave and then ended up just crashing out. And I think that was a very good experience. But after every crash is a really good time to regroup and start new businesses, because that constraint allows you to think differently, to seek out new opportunities, to learn from that experience. And so I actually thought it was a very good time to be incubating a new idea.
Oh, it's fascinating, really, because I guess you could go one of two ways. You could either think, wow, this is, there's just been this huge crash, which means that there's a huge opportunity because things are going to be settling. Or you could think, on the other hand, no, I've just experienced this huge crash. I've just observed that. I'm going to crawl back into my hole around being a lawyer because it's safe and very secure and not risky. But you decided to take the risky path. So how did you find the right colleagues to work with? How did you find the right, I guess, financial backers? That must have all been incredibly challenging for you, and particularly for a young woman, because we know the challenges that women have even, 20 years later, raising funding for new entrepreneurial ideas. So how did you find it back then?
It was really hard. It was very hard. And in fact, I was very lucky because the Young Australian of the Year Awards gave me a platform for public speaking, which basically funded the business early on. It was a way I bootstrapped the business because there was no other source of revenue. And in fact, after 2001, after September 11, that also came crashing down as well. So the public speaking circuit dried up. There were no more events. And so we went through not only a time where, I was a struggling entrepreneur with no money, and trying to find product market fit, but also the environment, the macro environment, which was my little safety net, also dried up. And so it was definitely a very challenging time. I reached out to one of my advisors at the time, Peter Williams, who was at Deloitte, and I asked Pete, we're running out of money. We have a whole bunch of eviction notices. I would never ask, but we're really at the end of the rope here. Would you lend us some money? And he said, how much money do you need? I said, $5,000 would go a really long way. And so he lent us $5,000, which we repaid in a few months, but it really made a big difference for us. So you get a sense of how broke we were. It wasn't like we were lavish. We all piled into the same apartment. We ate ramen noodles. And actually some entrepreneurs talk about being able to afford just being able to be run and break even. So that was what we was just trying to get to, but it took a very long time to find product market fit, especially in the early years. And I remember having a lot of conversations with people. In fact, the first lucky break was from Eddie Maguire. We reached out to Eddie, and he agreed to have a meeting, and we were talking about SMS technology, and we had been going around sharing what we had built. We just needed a place to show it off. And Eddie said, the footy show, do you want to do who's the player of the year? We could do that. And I said, when's that? And he said, next week. I said, yes, but I was terrified because we hadn't tried anything yet. And I remember getting the SLAs in place and trying to test all of the systems. But that was the first lucky break that we had, where we could actually demonstrate how the technology worked. And that basically allowed us to then license the technology to a bunch of other clients. And we were off to the races after that. But it did take quite a lot of work and time and effort.
Yeah, and how many iterations of the product were there?
There was one major iteration. So the first idea that we had was for mobile commerce. So at the time, you remember in Australia, D-Store was really big, Wishlist was really big. It was all about e-commerce, and we were seeing the success of Amazon in the United States. A lot of companies were focused on introducing e-commerce in Australia, and we thought there was still some friction associated with e-commerce. So we thought mobile commerce would be really great if you could still combine the efficiency of e-commerce, but with the joys of going and shopping in the physical world. That would be the best of both worlds. So we thought mobile commerce would be great. So an attachment to your mobile phone that would allow you to scan the barcode of a product and then use SMS as a bearer so that you can send the query back to a server and then find the best place to shop and purchase that product, then it would be ideal. Anyway, that was the idea, but it didn't work out. The barcode attachment thing, we would have to work with Ericsson. That was the only company that was doing barcode or products that would attach the phone at the time. And unfortunately, that idea didn't fly. And so we were left trying to figure out what could we do with what we had built. And the platform that we were using was based on SMS. So normally with short messages, you would send it to a mobile switching center. It would route it back to a mobile phone so that you can send a message to your friend or family. But in this case, we were sending it to an application server so that we could aggregate information and send it back to the user. And so we thought, well, maybe we could use it as an alternative to interactive voice response. And so that was the first idea. So it was two pivots, but that was one major pivot, but it took a long time to find a company that was willing to try it.
Yeah, and how much did you learn from the things that didn't work?
I think most of my learnings have been around things that didn't work, because you learn about determination, about agility, about flexibility, adaptability, which are really key qualities and characteristics that you need to be able to embrace when the world around you is very uncertain and constantly changing. And those principles that I learned in my early 20s have really guided me in this much longer kind of lifelong pursuit around the human brain, because it is a very challenging area of technology. It's a very deep technology and a frontier technology that requires a lot of resilience and a strong sense of determination and a very clear compass as to where you want to go and to pursue it despite some setbacks that you might get along the way. Because if you want to work on frontier technology, you can't have a 3-year or 5-year lens where you just want to build the tech and have an exit. It really does take a considerable amount of time to really build the underlying foundational technology, seed it to a market that's not necessarily ready to take on the new technology, and then to slowly build the application spaces around it and the entire ecosystem around the technology platform. So it does require a huge amount of determination and flexibility and adaptability, whether you're looking at business models, whether you're looking at how you're tackling new clients, even how you do your R&D. So yes, it was a very good learning experience for me.
Yeah. So when did you decide that you needed to move to the US? I mean, had you developed a product here that you felt was ready to go to the US, or did you just decide that for you it was important to move to the US?
So I moved to the US in 2005, and the catalyst for that was largely around the desire to be at the epicenter of technological innovation. I love Australia, and I will always call Australia my home, and I am so indebted to the opportunities that Australia afforded me and my family. But for the kind of work that I'm trying to pursue, it's really hard to do it in Australia, especially back in 2005, where we didn't have a mature ecosystem around venture, around even people who were familiar with technology, and also the partners that you need to bring along with you in this process. And so, I just needed to be among people who lived and breathed and were comfortable with technology. Here in the Bay Area, it's so easy. Every person you talk to, you can very quickly, they understand the process of what it takes to get to product market fit, how to launch a new product, how hard it is to, what stage you need to be at, what are the metrics you need to drive, what are vanity metrics. There's just so many things that are just standard here that everybody understands that would take quite a little bit of time and dedication to assemble a group of people or a collection of people that can be your sounding board. And I, unfortunately, at that time, I felt that it was a necessity for me, given where I wanted to go with this technology, to be here in the Bay Area.
Right. And do you think that's sort of matured more in Australia?
I absolutely think so. I think that the environment for entrepreneurship in Australia has evolved a lot. And I think we're starting to see some really breakthrough companies that have been very, very successful in Australia. So Canva, Afterpay, some of these companies have reached unicorn status, and they've shown that it's possible to be hugely successful companies being out of Australia and growing out of Australia and then dominating the global market. It's certainly possible. So I wouldn't say it's not possible to do it in Australia. I just think that what we need to do as a community that wants to nurture innovation and entrepreneurship is to make sure that we identify the characteristics that helps those companies be successful, and not to try and find the next Canva and the next Afterpay and just do the pattern matching around a SaaS business model or a marketplace business model, but really deeper to find out what were the real characteristics that drove the success of those companies in order to find the outstanding ones that we should back today, that will be the future unicorns that will come out of Australia. I certainly think it's possible now, and I think aided by COVID, we're seeing a lot more flexibility around work and the environment around remote work as well, which will certainly help Australia attract more international talent. So it will become less important where you are. And I also am finding that the venture community here in the Bay Area is also changing their tune about being in close proximity to Sand Hill Road, which was a very big barrier to a lot of companies in the past, where VCs wanted to be able to basically drive to their portfolio company and see what was going on. I think now things have evolved quite a bit from where they were 15 plus years ago now. And I think that's a really big step forward for many entrepreneurs that are thinking about starting companies in Australia and wanting to pursue this path of innovation. I think it's a really exciting time.
Oh, that's great. And tell us about EMOTIV and how you got involved with that and where it's at now. Because I remember seeing you at one of the TED Talk conferences where we did a trial of it. It was fantastic. It was so exciting. So tell us about that.
So EMOTIV's goal is to create the neural interface for every person on the planet. And so our belief is that if we want to advance our relationship with the brain, which is involved in every facet of our life, we need a non-invasive solution. To reach true ubiquitous use, it cannot be a neural implant. It can't be something that the fact is not everyone will want an implant and not everyone will be able to afford one, given the 7 billion people on the planet. So our goal has always been to create a ubiquitous form of neural interface. And the way that we've done that is we have focused on building a platform ecosystem that essentially supports three key components of that journey. The first thing is we focus on accelerating underlying research and discovery about the human brain. And the reason for that is because the brain is used in every facet of your life, EMOTIV cannot be the sole company that is doing all of the research on all the myriad things that you could be doing. And so we need to support a global neuroscience research community that can accelerate research and discovery. And so today, we support neuroscience research in 120 countries.
Wow.
With labs, research institutes, private researchers all around the world. And that's very important to our mission and vision. The second component of it is that you have to be able to build machine learning and AI models that allow you to recursively leverage the power of of these computational resources. And so the ability that the data network effects that you can derive from large scale data from all of these researchers plugging into the same infrastructure is immensely powerful. The problem with a lot of research today is that we use really high quality systems, but the data is stored locally. And so we can't piggyback off each other's work, and there's not really a relay where you can hand the baton on and someone can extend the work. So by connecting all of these researchers into the one set of machine learning and AI infrastructure, the learning is recursive and we can very rapidly build new insights. And that's also a massive transformation that's happening in the neuroscience research community that we're enabling. The third part that is really critical to our ecosystem is the ability to rapidly commercialize. And so through our APIs, what we can do is once you've built a new insight in the cloud, a new algorithm in the cloud, we can very quickly add that to the API so that you can build an application. So let's say, for example, you find a new way, a better way to enhance learning. So, you can understand, you can personalize learning. That particular algorithm can very quickly be added, and then you can build a very dynamic learning system that you can deploy right away. So instead of, currently, unfortunately, a lot of research is very slow because you build data on a very small, discrete sample population. It's using equipment that would only be used in the clinical lab. And so the journey to try and get it to a reproducible number is a very long journey. And then there's a huge amount of R&D and investment required to create a device that people will be able to use in their homes. The benefit of this commercialization ecosystem is that these devices are already used in people's homes. They're already used every day. And so there's a very big benefit to building on top of that platform and then deploying it back to the community of users. And so by creating this infrastructure, and we're still evolving our R&D. And so one of the new products that we're very excited about is a form factor that integrates seamlessly into everyday life. And so it looks like a pair of headphones. It's no different to what you would normally wear, but it also senses and measures your brain activity. And we are able to essentially use that as a platform to move towards a more ubiquitous use of neurotech, which I hope we'll see in the next, hopefully within less than 5 years, because right now we're already seeing a lot of momentum in that technology. But often innovators think it's around the corner and then it's a lot longer. So, we'll see. But I think it's a very exciting time for neurotechnology because the foundational steps are already done. And there's just so much momentum now around what's possible. People understand the power of the algorithm. Maybe 10 years ago, if we sat around a dinner table, no one would know what an algorithm is. It's probably only scientists or engineers would even talk about it. Now everybody knows what an algorithm is, and that's really great because it's part of everyday vernacular, and it allows people to embrace technology in a way that they weren't comfortable with even 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's amazing how the internet has introduced new language into everyday usage, like eyeballs and and algorithms and artificial intelligence
or device, things like that, which we didn't use in that way.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And of course, with algorithms, there's a whole issue, of course, around the ethics of the algorithms. We're seeing huge debates around that in the context of algorithms.
It's a massive challenge, and that's the issue with a lot. And that's one of the reasons why we focused on a very large global community, because bias is a very, very problematic area when you're building machine learning algorithms. If you have a biased data set that you're building on top of, it's not going to be representative. And that's why, even though we're still a relatively small company, we are very much focused on a global community of participants, because that addresses the underlying bias, making sure that we have diverse data sets that's representative, that's statistically significant, that's reproducible, that doesn't that mitigates bias is really, really important if you're talking about a tool that's helping you use your brain in a better way. And so we can't afford to create or at least for me, I come from a place where a lot of people didn't have the same means and opportunity. And so for me, it's very important to address not only access, which a lot of entrepreneurs focus on very well, which is making sure that people have access to technology, make it widely available, distributed broadly. But we also want to make sure that it's inclusive. It needs to be inclusive in the way that it's created, but also in the wealth opportunity that it generates as well. Because I don't want a situation where we continue to add to the disparity that exists today, right? We are seeing massive polarization in wealth, and it gets worse every year. So every time Oxfam does another release of the top 1%, gets even worse. And so we're doing very little about that. So one of the goals that I have is to try and make sure that if we have a chance to create the future, that we're also recreating the economics of what that looks like as well. And it cannot just be about philanthropy. I believe in philanthropy, but it actually has to go back to our core business model about empowerment as well, about inclusion in the economics of these systems. Because if it's just about us making technology accessible, that's not doing enough.
Yeah, I can hear the passion in your voice when you say that, which is fantastic. Well done. Getting back to more practical things, how large is your team? And before we were talking about whether or not you're working back in the office, and so I'd love to know about your team, how COVID affected you, how you handled it, and what the consequences and potential ongoing consequences are.
COVID was well, I guess in some respects it did affect us. We did have to shift because we were a team of people that worked in the office, although in a distributed way. So we have teams in Vietnam, in Australia, in the US. We, depending on the situation in each country, we took some proactive steps around closing down the office and making sure that people were safe. So in Vietnam, we kind of encouraged people to work from home well before the government implemented work from lockdown measures. But aside from that, for us, our team is about 100 people at this point. It wasn't particularly difficult from the standpoint of shuffling things around, because we all work on on our computers, and we're all connected in the cloud. We use web apps. I think the companies for tech companies, I think it was really easy to do that transition. If anything, I think the hardest thing for me personally has been to find that balance between work and your personal life. And I think that when we look at our employee engagement surveys, the mental well-being and the balance for people, and finding that balance is those are some of the big areas that we need to address as the executive and leadership team, because we need to institute measures to be able to do that. One of the other things that I think is more challenging is making sure people have a buddy system, especially for new people that you onboard to the organization. It's quite hard to get a sense of a company's culture and style when everything is remote. It's really been more about how do you ensure that your workforce feels connected, feels that there's a sense of fit and belonging, and that you're looking after their well-being outside of work. Because when you're in the office, if someone's feeling tired, you can see it, and you can tell them, you can nudge them to take a break. If they're working online, the only thing you see are messages. And so unless you're having a conversation, and a lot of the times we also allow people to not turn on their cameras for fear of fatigue. That's also something that it's really hard to gauge. So that can be challenging for sure. But aside from that, those are the main things.
But you were saying before you don't think that you'll go back to your office anytime soon, and you've been out of your office now for 18 months?
We've been out of the office since March last year in the US, and we're not planning to return to the office anytime soon, largely because of the Delta variant, and I have a young child at home that can't be vaccinated. So some of that is selfish personal reasons as well. I have a certain concern, even though we're all vaccinated in the team. But I also think that people have, after working at home for a long time, you settle into a new rhythm of how you like to work, and you've really set up yourself. And when we polled our team, a lot of people feel that they are just as productive. And so we value the idea of being able to do some collaborative work, but also want to be able to have the flexibility to work at home. And so we're going to extend that out and see what happens. Some folks so our team in Vietnam, they want to return to work, and they will be largely going back to the office starting next week. It's been 5 months of working from home for them, and that for them is a long time. And for Vietnam, I think because people's homes are smaller as well, they don't have a lot of outdoor space. It's good for their mental well-being. There's a very strong community spirit there. In Australia, we are doing a hybrid model where we have the team coming into the office 2 to 3 days a week. We have 2 definite days at the office. Unfortunately, we're in Sydney, so they're working from home at the moment too. But when we temporarily reopened, we had a 2-day committed, a 1-day flex, and then 2 days at home. And that seemed to be what the team's preference was. And so we try to accommodate the preferences of the team as much as we can. And I know lots of people like the FaceTime, and we definitely think that's valuable, but giving people some flexibility there has been our motto so far.
Yeah, I think that we're all developing new ways of working, and I think that will probably continue for the next couple of years as we work out what the balance is that works for individuals and for businesses.
Yes,
yeah,
sure.
It's very, very fluid. Tan, how have you found the attitude towards female tech entrepreneurs? Because we hear all these stories about how female tech entrepreneurs really get very, very a small part of the VC funding that's available. They are treated somewhat differently by investors. What's been your experience, and what also is your observation around that?
I think the observations and statistics don't lie, Carol, and I think that that's something that we have to be very cognizant of. My personal experience has been a bit of an outlier in many respects. I think that once you are able to establish yourself in a specific domain, women tend to get those women tend to get a disproportionate amount of opportunity. And so for me, I think early on in my career, there were some moments where it was challenging, but once you've reached a certain point and you are more visible, I think you'd end up getting more opportunities because of the fact that you're a woman. And I recognize that I am a little bit of an outlier from that standpoint because I am visible, because I run my own business that's in a very unique field, and I have a personal brand that I've established over the last 20 years. And so I recognize that. And I think it's our responsibility to make sure that we nurture the next generation of women that's coming through, because it's harder for them. And I do remember that time, but I also know that, I had a Young Australian of the Year award accolade behind my back. So there were opportunities that even when I was going out to get a job as a young grad from Monash, it was a little bit easier for sure having that. There have been a few things that have altered the course of the opportunities that I've been able to have for myself. And so I think that that's also shaped my own view of the opportunities for women. But it's certainly hard because I do have a lot of women friends who have struggled more to attract investors. And to be perfectly honest, if they don't know who you are, you definitely get a real sense of how they would treat you otherwise. So if I go to an event and no one knows, they don't have your CV, they've never met you, and you're like, I'm a 5'2", or like 153 centimeters tall, all the men are towering over me, it's really hard. So I don't like those environments. It's super hard for me. You remember what it was like at the TED thing. I've been a TED speaker. I'm coming back as a former speaker, and I was still struggling. I need smaller circles where I get to know people, whereas the big, those sorts of events can be very challenging for me.
So do you find that there's a group now of women in the US who invest in women entrepreneurs?
Yes. There are definitely a lot of my friends are investors that focus on women entrepreneurs as well, or founders who may not have the standard networks that would be the traditional, like Stanford grad, MIT grad, the people that would typically attract VC funding relatively easily. And so, yes, there are definitely more opportunities now than there were before, but those are smaller funds. Those are not the preeminent, the standard funds. And so, yes, there are. But I also have a very unique collection of friends who are also very outstanding in their own fields, and so they've also been quite successful in attracting funding, even as female founders. So we have a little group.
Well, that's great to hear, but I'm very excited because we've just invested in a fund that's being set up by 2 Australian women who are based on the West Coast. It's called Aliavia, and they are backing women entrepreneurs in both the US and Australia. So very, very exciting. I'm just hoping that more women start to establish funds or take on, very senior roles in VC funds, because even if this is not a VC fund that does focus on women founders and entrepreneurs, that when there are women around the investment committee making those decisions, you can bet your bottom dollar that there are going to be more women entrepreneurs invested in and those opportunities taken up, because men don't necessarily see the same opportunities as women do.
Yes. And Carol, I know you've been a very strong advocate for women for as long as I've known you, and I think that that's absolutely the right way. And I'm actually very very happy and really honored that I'm also on the investment committee for QBE Ventures, because I think you're absolutely right that is something that we need to do. And it does change the nature of the conversations. We are going to see things slightly differently, and hopefully we will open up more opportunities for women as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Tan, it's been such a pleasure speaking to you. And my last question always is around, I'm always curious as to what people are reading or watching on Netflix or any other streaming service. So
yes.
Any books or things?
Yeah, so the book that I'm reading at the moment is Flux by a girlfriend, April Rinnie. It's really good. It's about navigating an environment of constant change, and I think it's a really well written book about leadership. I don't get to watch a ton of TV, but I recently finished the worldwide phenomenon Money Heist, which was really quite good, and I'm just starting to watch Foundation, which is a sci-fi show on Apple Plus, or whatever Apple's streaming service is called. But it's really exciting and fun to watch.
Great. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing your stories. As you know, you are a wonderful storyteller, you are a wonderful entrepreneur, and you are a wonderful Australian. So it's been great speaking to you, and I hope to see you next time you come out to Australia.
I'm so excited. I can't wait to introduce you to my little girl.
Yeah, I can't wait. Thank you so much, Tan.
Thanks, Carol.